Welcome to the Playing Hooky podcast with your hosts Rachel and Nathan, brought to you by UtilityMuffinLabs.com. Consistently rated adequate.
Welcome everybody to the Playing Hooky podcast. My name is Rachel.
And I'm Nathan. How are you?
I'm good. Why are you laughing?
I'm just laughing because when you clapped, I looked over to make sure that it registered, thus defeating the whole purpose of being counted in so that I could look at the camera when we started.
Should I start again?
No, not at all.
So, I learned that very recently, the whole clapping and then it syncs with the audio and the visual.
Yeah, right.
I learned that's a thing to do because of reasons I can't talk about. But
I also recently learned that. I'm going to try to sit up a little
why did you only recently learn that? Wasn't that like a thing you learned in school?
No.
Oh.
No. I mean, it's pretty common sense if you think about it, but no, it's just like one of those things that if you don't think about it, you don't really know that a long, quick, sort of short spanning strike through the top and the bottom is a very good visual indicator of recording. And also when you record a podcast or a video like this, and you turn your head, the microphone might not catch you. These are all things.
I'm trying really hard.
I actually was being critical of myself.
Because it's hard to not look at you and talk to you.
Right. Which is why we have an awkward setup for video, but it's still great.
Yeah, it's still great. It's better than most things in life.
But it brings us back to this being the first video we recorded in
a long time.
Yeah, since at least November, but maybe before that.
Maybe
October.
Before that.
No,
yeah.
Before that too, because we didn't do any video for the entire time we were in Vegas, and we didn't do any video. So I think September was the last time we recorded video.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a minute, but so we hope you guys liked some of the recordings, podcasts we did while we were in Vegas. I listened to them because apparently I'm very self-involved, but also because I was like, oh, this was a fun thing. I wanted to relive that experience. And boy, I hated listening back to them. So I hope you enjoyed them. Because one thing I realized is that, and I owe you an apology, although I've apologized to you in person, but I'll do it on the record. When I have an agenda or a list, a to-do list, my brain's in to-do list, get the things done mode. Yeah. And so I feel like I was we talk about this and then we talk about this and we talk about this and we talk about this. And I was kind of rushing through it and just being and I was working so much during the time when we were in Vegas that my brain was hyper-focused work mode. So even that that translated and kind of bled over into my regular life where I couldn't get off of the task-oriented, I've got an agenda, I have these things I have to complete kind of mindset. And so when I listened back to those podcasts, I was like, oh God, Nate, this podcast is terrible. I sound like such a jerk. I'm rushing through things and interrupting you, and I'm so sorry. So I don't know if the listeners noticed that, but I certainly noticed I was very interrupty.
If anybody noticed it, they didn't say anything. And also, I think I have a tendency to be very willing to step aside and let other people talk. I don't really have, I'm not agenda driven in that regard. So whatever, who cares?
All right. Well, as long as you had fun.
Yeah. I mean, I don't do this to speak over you. I'm not agenda driven, so I don't care.
I feel like you're kind of insulting me while complimenting.
No,
okay, you're I'm not agenda driven, so it's okay if you are. That's how
you heard it.
It's because there's a lot of neuroses up here.
Yeah.
So basically, if I can find a thing to fixate on, I will. And that was the thing at the time. But anyway, I thought they were fun podcasts overall.
I don't really give a shit because I had a great time recording them, and I had a great time doing the things that we did to get to the point where we're recording them. So I don't really care.
One thing I wanted to bring up about those episodes, we actually got someone tweeted at us that they liked the videos and the podcasts, and they thought it would be fun for in the future if we did the same thing but with coffee shops. And they were talking about Tim Hortons and Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I would too. So that
Spoiler alert. Dunkin' Donuts will win every single one of them, but
I don't know. It kind of depends on what we get, and it kind of depends on what part of the country we're in. I feel because here's the thing I've noticed about Starbucks is they're very consistent from place to place. Dunkin' Donuts must be like a franchise operation, or I don't know,
so.
maybe not, because I've found that like when you go to village, there's maybe a little bit of variety in what you're going to get as far as like consistency. But overall, I think Dunkin's pretty good. But I
think they are. Well, I think they definitely are a franchise operation. Like I think you can buy into the franchise, and the franchise does have certain requirements and restrictions about like how often the coffee should be made, how often it should be poured out. However, just like any other business, sometimes those aren't followed.
Right.
But basically, Dunkin' Donuts, and this is based on just the information I have, they only gather their coffee from a few very select sources. So usually their coffee, as far as like the flavor is concerned, should be pretty consistent. Now, the operation and the execution of that coffee might vary from place to place just due to laziness.
Yeah, I have to say though, I think Dunkin' across the board, even though there's like small inconsistencies here and there, like there was one time my coffee was cold, and that's never fun. But to be fair, I was the jerk off ordering a decaf coffee at 9:00 at night, so kind of my fault too. But overall, I have a very positive feelings towards Dunkin'. But it would be cool to go to a part of the country where you could hit up a couple different chains in one day and maybe find like a couple nice like local, small business coffee shops to kind of get a fun beverage at too. So maybe for the future, we can do that if we're ever like out on the East Coast or like up north where there's a Tim Hortons. Because that was a big one. Everyone's like, Tim, you gotta try Tim Hortons. We don't have them here.
Yeah, I think on the way to wherever we were going,
Maryland?
the East Coast, Maryland. Yeah, we were on our way to Maryland last year, I think like in April or something like that.
Yeah.
And there was a Tim Hortons on the way that was like attached to a gas station.
Yeah, but I don't think that would really be representative of like the best of Tim Hortons, Yeah, because I mean, like it's true of Subways. It's probably true of Tim Hortons. Like if you got to get a Subway, probably you don't want to go to one that's connected to a gas station.
I don't really want to go to a Subway, period, but that's just me.
I don't know.
So
I'm a pretty big fan of that meatball sub.
You know what? I feel like over the course of 20 plus years of going to Subway, I've pretty much. It's a wrap. Like there's not much left at Subway I enjoy or want to eat.
I'll agree with you. However, there's something nostalgic about it for me sometimes. It's the same reason why, like, if I had the choice to eat a really delicious dinner that was cooked from scratch or eat macaroni and cheese with tuna in it, sometimes I'm going to choose the macaroni and cheese with tuna because it's like, that's what we ate a lot when I was like a little kid and poor. And there's just something about it that reminds me, of the past. And it's like that nostalgic flavor, even though it's not the best meal. So sometimes I get a hankering for like a meatball sub or, something with a lot of banana peppers on it. I don't know. I'm kind of hungry. I think we should eat dinner right after this.
Yeah. So let's get into the actual purpose of this before somebody's like, you're already 10 minutes in. You didn't even get to the conversation.
Whatever.
If you
get a life.
If you want to hear, you'll listen. Anyways, we watched 2 animated movies. I think that in their particular circles, both of these animated movies would be considered classics. However, I would say they're considered that for very distinctly different reasons. So what did we watch?
So I brought to the table Spirited Away, the classic Studio Ghibli anime by Hayao Miyazaki. And Nate brought to the table Heavy Metal by
a bunch of people.
And I don't know really much about Heavy Metal. And I know a little bit about Spirited Away. And so I don't know. I think we should probably start with Heavy Metal.
Okay.
Because I'm curious. I have some questions I'd like to ask you.
Sure. Yeah. Heavy Metal is a movie that I watched probably way too young because it's a cartoon. I don't know if anybody else watching or listening has experienced this, but when I was a kid, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, somewhere around there, maybe even younger, depending, if something was a cartoon, it was kind of like no one gave a shit if you watched it, no matter how violent or over the top it might have been. I don't know if you experienced this, but like when I was growing up, things that were not acceptable to watch were sex in movies. However, violence was pretty much like open.
I kind of got to call bullshit on you on this, though, because didn't you tell me your parents wouldn't let you watch The Simpsons?
No.
Oh, your parents let you watch The Simpsons?
Yeah, no, my parents never. If my parents didn't let me watch The Simpsons, it's because they didn't like The Simpsons.
Oh, okay.
No, so I don't know.
But did you watch The Simpsons?
I watched it occasionally.
Okay, all right. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else.
I remember watching the first episode of The Simpsons. I think in like 1988.
Okay, well maybe I'm misremembering this.
Definitely wasn't me.
So you like as long as it was a cartoon, your parents were down.
It seems like it. In my memory, yes, it seems like it because I know I watched this movie way earlier than I should have. And I do remember there being boobies. Now,
to be fair, I feel like I watched it way earlier than I should have. And I watched it yesterday.
But I remember being a little kid and my parents being like, oh, there's a scene you can't watch. You got to leave the room for a few minutes. And so I remember.
Were you just in and out of the room constantly?
Yeah. So if you watch like any action movie from the 80s, a lot of them had lots and lots of violence. And then there was like one or two sex scenes just sort of like shoved in there for no good reason. This movie's kind of like that.
Okay.
It is. So heavy metal, to answer the question I know you're going to ask, heavy metal is like a fantasy and action comic book magazine from the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
And it's very like, it's got like a very like Frank Frazetta sort of feel to it, like incredibly muscular heroes and like incredibly buxom, sexy women. It's totally sophomoric and juvenile, but it's just it's a style of comic book. It's a style of fantasy.
Okay.
And from what I understand of it, it was made into a movie in like 1980. And I guess it was pretty groundbreaking for the time, pretty edgy, I suppose.
Yeah.
So questions.
So I guess you said that you had seen it a bunch of times.
Yeah, I've seen it a bunch of times.
And do you know how old you are when you first saw it?
I can't recall, but I feel like I was younger than I should have been.
So like under 10.
I don't think I was that young when I first saw it. It probably was like, 10, 11, 12, somewhere before teen, but like old enough where I could now that I'm thinking about it, I probably first saw it.
Let's go into the past.
I probably first saw it on television. So it was probably
like HBO?
No, maybe HBO, but probably on TV where it was maybe edited with a lot of like the sex and stuff cut out of it.
Did they like play it on MTV?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay.
But I know the first time I ever saw it, it was kind of like one of those things that was introduced to me by my parents.
Okay.
So I know when it came out, my parents were in their very early 20s when I was born. So
it came out like, I think, around when you were born.
Yeah, it came out a little bit after I was born. So
okay.
Yeah, it was just something I saw very young. And I feel like, especially now looking back and watching it, because I haven't watched it in a bunch of years, it definitely, like watching it now, I'm like, oh yeah, that's something I definitely would have been interested in at like 12 years old.
Yeah, it seems something like it seems like something that was made to appeal to a certain demographic of young man.
15 is probably the prime age.
Right. So tell me a little bit about like the structure of the movie, because it's not necessarily a linear story.
No, it's so it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. It's got a bunch of different short stories, most of which were adapted from the Heavy Metal magazine and animated and put into this movie. So the first how the movie starts, it starts off with this space shuttle, like basically coming in from outer space, like to land and like dropping this Corvette from space. And it's, from what I understand, it's like a pretty iconic scene. This Corvette with the space astronaut with his astronaut in it. And, that the car coming in from outer space and landing, and then the astronaut driving off to, his house or whatever. Then this astronaut gets home and he shows his daughter this thing that he found in space. And then like all the terrible stuff ensues. And so basically, it's set up like different chapters of a book, basically, that sort of vaguely lead into one another. And it's the story of this ball, this orb that is
an orb of evil or something.
It's what is it? It's called the Lochnar, the sum of all evils.
Okay.
And it tells the story of this orb and how it corrupts, how, its presence is a corrupting force in all these different times and worlds and universes. And I think it goes through like 7 or 8 different short stories
about how Lochnar, the whatever of evils, sum of all evils, travels through space and time, and the way Lochnar affects different people and cultures and scenarios.
There's a lot of people that get melted by this thing. That is a pretty common theme throughout this whole movie.
Another pretty common theme is a man being transformed from a zero to a hero, and then lucking his way into sexual intercourse with a very buxom woman.
Yeah, it definitely has. It has like it's designed, I think, to be very pulpy. It's a kind of like a pulp inspired series of stories. So like the first one, when we get past so the first chapter that I was describing, that's called Soft Landing, and the second part, which is basically an overlap of the first, is called Grimaldi. And the ball is terrorizing this young girl and sort of opens up to tell her the story of its evil and how it corrupts. And then we move on into the next story, which is called Harry Canyon. And Harry Canyon is inspired by The Long Tomorrow, which was by Mobius and Dan O'Bannon, sorry. And
who was it by?
Dan O'Bannon.
Okay.
And so you had kind of asked me some things because while we were watching it yesterday, some things came up and you were like, one of the things that came up was you asked if it was Canadian.
Yeah.
Because it has a bunch of really famous Canadian actors.
Yeah.
John Candy being one of them.
Right.
Harold Ramis being another. And actually it is. It's Canadian.
Oh, so spot on. Nice. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing, this story specifically really reminded me of The Fifth Element.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that. So that first kind of like chapter where we're learning about the history and past of this evil Lochnar. Yeah. You were like, does this remind you of The Fifth Element? And I was going to ask you about that. Is this something that had occurred to you before?
No,
or it occurred to you as you're watching? I'm like, oh my God, there's so many similarities. It's kind of like a working class guy driving around a taxi. He's also like, you can tell there's like some edge to him. Like he's into larceny or he might have like a criminal background where he kind of is very streetwise. I just realized that I basically listed off several things off of a vampire character sheet. Sorry. And anyway, so and then he like just randomly runs into this girl who has this like secret power or something, and the cops are after her, and there are these mercenaries from another planet chasing. Right. And it's like it's similar enough in plot to The Fifth Element where you're like, this kind of seems like, I was like, I wonder if The Fifth Element ripped this off.
So here's where it all comes from. So heavy metal, like I said, it's a, pulp fantasy, adventure magazine, comic book magazine. And I guess there is a French version of it too called Metal Hurlant.
Now it all makes sense.
Yeah. And so that French version, I believe that's where The Long Tomorrow originated from, but it was in heavy metal as well, obviously.
Yeah, I think I know, like, because there's a connection there. I'm pretty sure the director who made The Fifth Element was French.
Yeah.
So whether he
Luc
was
Besson
so whether he was inspired by this magazine or it was based on one of the stories. And
so The Long Tomorrow actually inspired both William F. Gibson, and it also was the visual reference for Blade Runner. So this story, this foundational story.
Wait, this cartoon in heavy metal?
Not this cartoon.
Okay.
Okay, so over here we have The Long Tomorrow.
Okay.
And The Long Tomorrow is what inspired the Heavy Metal magazine. It's what inspired William F. Gibson. It basically is, it's it's sort of acknowledged as the first cyberpunk story.
Okay.
And so all things kind of emanate from this one source.
Okay.
And so the direct link between Harry Canyon and this story is like 1 degree of separation.
Okay.
So yes, they are all sort of inspired by the same thing.
Okay. Well, that's really cool. Like, good research there, babe.
Yeah. And also I found out, just doing, again, some cursory research that the probe droid in Empire Strikes Back was taken directly from The Long Tomorrow. Like, the visual design of it was completely taken from that story.
What's the probe droid?
It's the probe droid. It will be right here because I'll put it in the video.
Okay.
But if you are into Empire Strikes Back, you'll probably know. We are not nerds enough, and I can't visually explain it with my words.
Okay.
So anyways.
You can't visually explain it with your words?
I can't visually explain it with my words.
Okay.
So we move on to the next story, and it's the one that you were talking about where the nerdy kid, voiced by John Candy, finds this orb.
Was it voiced by John Candy, the nerdy kid?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So he gets transported into another dimension and transformed into this massive muscle-bound guy.
It was like a Captain America transformation.
Yeah. And he grabs like a cloth to hide his dork.
That's what he says. It's a quote from the movie. Got to hide my dork.
And high fantasy ensues. This is very He-Man-like.
Yep.
And also lots of gratuitous sex for no reason.
Lots of sex.
Yeah.
Well,
we've already had 3 sex scenes.
Some almost sex, and then some maybe sex, and then some revenge sex, and then some angry sex.
Here's the thing about this cartoon. They're not showing like insertion, they're not showing penetration. So even if it's just boobs, I personally consider it a sex scene.
Yeah, it's not. It kind of like all of these stories when they get to the point where sex is about to happen or sex is insinuated, it very much reminds me of like what you would think of in like a stereotypical like 70s porn where it's like a guy finds himself in a situation and then a woman just throws herself at him.
Sometimes it's not even a guy. Sometimes it's a robot. But
or a robot. Yeah. There's a woman who has sex with a robot. And
so one of your big complaints was that the color on this one kept like changing.
Yeah, on this particular one where the guy goes from like Captain American skinny to Captain America muscly, and then goes to the other planet and all the sex happens. The color changes. He's like, at first he's blue, and then he's like purple, and then he's like a brown color. And I'm like, why does he keep changing colors? Like, it's so weird from scene to scene.
Yeah, and the only thing that I could think of was this cartoon uses a technology or technique called rotoscoping. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know if it played a major role in sort of the inconsistency or if it was just like they just didn't care. But rotoscoping is pretty obvious in the next scene as well, in the next chapter of the anthology, which is called B-17. And the B-17 is, honestly, that's the one that really stuck with me when I was a kid. Like, I really wanted to know more about what was happening because it was such a short chapter.
Remind me, I don't remember what this was.
So B-17 is a bomber during World War II who had just come back from like a particularly harrowing mission, dropping off their bombs, and the co-pilot goes to check on the rest of the crew in the cabin or whatever of the plane. And, he goes through and they've all died. They've all been shot, whatever, during their bombing run. So he goes from the back to the front and...
From the back to the front.
And no, it's okay. And he notices this glowing orb, which is chasing the airplane. That's the Lochnar. Or not even the Lochnar, it's just Lochnar. Mm-hmm. It's like an entity, a personality. And Lochnar boards the ship and basically brings all of the crew back from the dead as these like, decaying monstrous zombies, essentially, guts hanging out. It's really bloody and gory and graphic, but you can really see the rotoscoping because basically, from my understanding of rotoscoping is they film a model, regardless of what it is. In this instance, it was a 10-foot model of a bomber, and they animate each cell. And so in doing that, you kind of get these like interesting, bizarre inconsistencies because they're hand animating every cell of it. And I think it's similar to what you would see in that movie with Keanu Reeves. A Scanner Darkly.
So, okay.
Yeah. So I think that's a much more modern version of rotoscoping. Anyways, B-17, all the crew comes back to life and they kill the co-pilot. And so the pilot, sees what's happening and they're pounding through the door trying to get in, and he's got to jump out and parachute and escape. And he lands on this island that looks like it's probably in the South Pacific, like a paradise island with palm trees, but it's like a graveyard for all of these, downed airplanes. And as he lands and he's trying to find his bearings, all these monstrous, decaying corpses come to life with their glowing green eyes to kill him.
Yeah, it felt very Twilight Zone-y, That's what it reminded me of. Yeah, an episode of The Twilight Zone, a very 4-minute long episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and then I believe after that one was the story of the captain, Captain Stern. I believe that was the next one.
The trial.
Yeah,
there's like a guy
you're charged with 32 counts of murder and blah 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 and one traffic violation.
Yeah, and then the Lochnar possesses some guy and goes after him. This is where I started to really lose interest. I was like, okay. I was like, all right.
Yeah,
I wasn't bored. Actually, I lied. Where the movie really lost me was one of the last stories in the anthology where there's no joke, an 8-minute long scene with no dialogue where we're watching a naked woman put on a BDSM costume.
That's the very last one.
Pull a sword out of some water, but she's slowly putting on boots and then a piece of armor that is essentially just a black piece of fabric that goes around her vajay and over her nips. And then she's got one shoulder shield and very heavy purple eyeshadow on, and looks very David Bowie-ish from The Labyrinth, this eyeshadow. And and she's wet and just trying to put on this seductively over her very feminine, voluptuous body. And I think I was kind of okay.
Well, I mean, at least you got to the end.
I did get to the end. I watched it.
Because to me, that one was always the best realized one. Now I can understand maybe the gratuitous,
It's not even that it was gratuitous. It was, maybe that is the right word. I think of gratuitous as being yeah, I mean, maybe it was just over the top. It was
just too much.
It was over the top. I was I get it. I get that this is a cartoon of a naked woman meant to appeal to young boys. But I was it didn't hold my attention because despite appearances and many of my interests, I'm not super gay. So I was just it was just not. I was just okay. And then you even, normally when we're watching something and you're still paying attention because your brain can focus on 4 things at once, or at least it thinks it can. And so you'll often pick up your phone. I'm are you bored? Do you want to change this? And you're no, I like it. I just hadn't touched my phone and looked at it for 10 minutes. I was generally I was picking up the phone, checking Instagram,
I
searching other things. And he's are you not going to watch this anymore? I'm I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell probably a half an hour to 45 minutes in. And I really appreciate you watching the whole thing, because I was going to watch the whole thing regardless of whether or not you were. I get it. It is a product of its time.
Yeah.
It's something that I enjoy. I've always liked it. But nowadays watching it, there's a lot of threads in the sweater to pull. So one of the cool things about it, though, I found out, I haven't watched it yet, but there's a reboot on Netflix right now.
Ooh, we got to watch that.
Love, Death, and Robots. So I imagine it's probably a much more, it's probably a better version of it, especially considering the director Tim Miller is a part of it, and what's his name, the director of Seven and Fight Club, David Fincher. that both of them had a hand in its creation. So it's probably a lot better.
So here's what I'll say. Like, I don't think it was terrible. I didn't hate it. I'm much more likely to watch it again than like Full Metal Jacket. I did not enjoy that. So, I mean, it was fun. I'm glad I saw it. There's like a lot of cultural references. And the one thing that you didn't talk about, which surprised me, is the music in it.
Yeah, I just hadn't gotten to it.
It's just, okay, so do you want to talk about the music?
Go ahead.
Well, as you say, there's a lot of great classic music in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty renowned for being having a lot of very popular rock bands at the time, putting music out or making music specifically for it. Some of them being like Sammy Hagar, Devo, Blue Oyster Cult, Cheap Trick,
Black Sabbath.
There's a Journey song. There's a Stevie Nicks song in it. So there's, I mean, even that music by, if you're younger than 30 nowadays, that might be like, who gives a shit? But at the time, it was pretty. It's a good soundtrack. I truly enjoy it.
Yeah, I think everyone who's like a fan of movies or pop culture, classic rock music, just nerdy things in general, I think everyone should probably like put it on their list of things like to kind of watch. I'm not trying to say that it's in the same category as Casablanca, but if you want to watch like old movies, or even though this isn't as old as that, I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's a cult hit. Yeah. So if you want to kind of check it off the list of cult movies, then it's worth your time.
Also, another film in the same vein as this that might be of interest to some people is one called Wizards. They're usually kind of like packaged together if you buy one off of Amazon. So that's another one that you might want to check out. It's came out right around the same time. Very similar animation. So yeah, there's a few, and then there's even a sequel to this that is called like FAKK2. I've never seen it. I think it came out in 2000. So yeah, I don't know what that one's about, but it's very similar. Cool. So heavy metal, one of my favorites from a kid from my childhood.
Cool. Awesome. So I think it was good. I recommend people check it out if for no other reason than to have that little piece of historical context.
So as we move on to the next one, what was the question you asked me last night? We were sitting on the couch and you're like, which one of these do you like better?
Oh yeah. I was like, not which one do you like better? I asked you, I think, which one was the better movie? Like which one wins? Yeah. And you're like, I don't remember what you said. It was very diplomatic, his answer.
Yeah, I was like, well, I think that they both are good for different reasons. Yeah. They both have their merit. But like, here's the truth. Spirited Away, I think anybody that's seen Spirited Away can agree that it's pretty much like a peerless classic.
Yeah.
I'd never seen it before, and the reason why I'd never seen it before is because I usually am not a big anime person. I tend to be a anime no forward person.
Yeah, you're just a hard no.
Yeah, just a hard no. If you're like, watch this anime, I'm like, nah, I'm okay. I'll pass. Mm-hmm. But I had I'd seen a lot of like references to it recently, and I was kind of like, well, maybe that's, a lot of people said it's really good, like even if you're not into it. And I don't remember exactly how you had presented it to me, but it was your idea for us to watch it.
I think it was because to bring up Full Metal Jacket again as like kind of like just to be silly, I was like, oh, we should watch Full Metal Alchemist and do a Full Metal Alchemist, Full Metal Jacket episode because same title. Like I'm
Which
sure,
we did.
Yeah. And I think we both felt like similarly about the opposite thing. You're like, nah, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's too silly. It's too cutesy anime, which I think it's one of the least cutesy animes I've ever seen, which is kind of saying something.
I can't get past the face thing and
so the animation kind of
it doesn't do it.
Yeah, it doesn't do it for you. And I was like, okay, well, I know from personal experience that there are some very good anime out there. I'm by no means like a huge anime fan or a connoisseur, but one of the things I am positive that I knew he would appreciate, even if he didn't like, was Spirited Away, because maybe I just only run with a certain type of people, but I have never met anybody who's seen it that didn't like it or couldn't appreciate it. Yeah. It's because it's weird. It's got a lot of Asian and Japanese folklore. Mm-hmm. It's beautifully animated. Even the English version, the dubbed version, the voice acting is really good. So I knew that even if you didn't like anime, you would still find something you could like in this movie.
Strangely enough, my big complaint with a lot of anime is that it's very kiddie. Even when it's not intended for children, it seems very immature to me.
Yeah.
Seems very like childlike. And the main protagonist is a child.
Yeah.
But it doesn't even come off as childlike. It doesn't. And if it does come off as childlike, it's definitely not in the same way other animes do it. It's not
it's whimsical.
It's not childlike for the sake of being childish.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my issues with anime I watch, including Full Metal Alchemist, was it seemed immature and childish for the sake of being that way. Not because you have a child who's like discovering this world for the first time with a sort of naivete,
mm-hmm.
which is what Spirited Away presented, but just like, I'm an angry, petulant child. Meh.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I don't get into that. But this movie, I definitely strongly felt that the story was very unique. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And
a lot of layers.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of layers. And it was bizarre on a way. I think I just spit on the microphone.
It's sorry. Right.
Anyways, it was bizarre in ways that really I found quite enjoyable. I like weird off-kilter stuff. I like when humans pig out and turn into pigs. I like when giant masks open their mouths to eat.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a really bizarre, truly unique story. And maybe there's other stuff out there like it. I don't know. But for me, for this being my first exposure to this style of story, I really thought it was unique and not like anything I'd seen before.
Yeah, it's definitely something that if you've never seen it before, you watch it and then you like it, you'll want to go back and watch it a couple more times because you'll probably notice some like interesting, weird things. And I'd also recommend, I think when we watched it, we watched the dub version in English. I would also recommend watching it in Japanese.
Did we watch it in English? I couldn't remember.
I'm pretty sure we did. But I would recommend doing both, watching in Japanese with the subtitles, because there's a slight difference in the way it's translated when it's written versus when someone's like voice acting it. And I think that there are some elements of the story that are slightly easier to understand, or things you pick up on when you're reading it versus when you're listening to it, because they have to change the dialogue a little bit in English to get it to match up with the timing of the cartoon.
Right.
So
also the movement of their mouths and try to like match. Yeah.
Right. So there's like some nuance that you get when you watch it in the Japanese versus the English that I think is nice to have. And it's almost like you get to watch a slightly different version of the same movie.
Watching movies with subtitles has honestly never bothered me. I actually watch almost every movie we watch together with subtitles.
Yeah, I don't know.
I like to hear and read.
Yeah, me too. We got in the habit of that, like when we moved in together.
Yeah.
Like we kind of like always have the subtitles on. It's also nice when you like live in community housing, like an apartment or a condo. If you don't want to turn your TV up, you're allowed.
Right. But you want to keep it a little quiet,
Yeah.
That's a habit I got into a long time ago, and just try to maintain that.
Yeah.
But you asking me the question, which one was better? I think objectively, Spirited Away is a better movie.
Okay.
And I can acquiesce to that. It is a better movie. It's better produced, better written, better story. But I think it's also a lot like asking me if like Pulp Fiction or Commando is a better movie. Because here's the problem. I love Pulp Fiction. It is my favorite movie, and it's very intricately written, and it's probably inspired by a lot of different other movies and comes from a lot of different places. But sometimes you just want to see a big muscle-bound dude through a pipe through another guy's chest.
Okay, fair enough.
So to me, I definitely like Pulp Fiction better. I think it's a better movie. But sometimes I want to watch Commando because Arnold Schwarzenegger kills a bunch of dudes.
It's fair. Yeah.
So I think
sometimes you want the fancy dinner. Sometimes you want the macaroni and cheese and tuna.
Mac and cheese and tuna. It's a good meal. You should try it. So I definitely think Spirited Away is a movie that I've wanted to watch a second time for a while, because just the story and the magic of the world and the bizarreness of the characters. Watching it the first time was like, oh man, like I don't know what the hell's going on, but I'm really interested. So
we watched it a couple months ago, and so it's not as fresh in our minds as Heavy Metal. But just to give like a very brief synopsis, if anyone hasn't seen it. So essentially what happens is you're introduced to this character named Chihiro, and she's a 10-year-old little girl. And at the beginning of the film, you find out that she and her parents are moving away from where the town she's grown up in, to a new city. And she's kind of feeling sorry for herself and being pouty in the back seat because she's unhappy about having to make this move. And they're driving to the new house, and they get kind of lost. Her dad takes a shortcut and gets a little bit lost in the woods. And then you start to see some like creepy, spooky Shinto statues along the side of the road. And you're like, what's going to happen next? And then her dad takes a wrong turn, and they end up pulling into what they think is like an abandoned or old carnival. Or not a carnival, but an amusement park. That's the word I was looking for. And they start wandering around the amusement park, and they see that all of the food vendors, all the stalls have like freshly cooked foods. And the way the food is animated makes you hungry, and it makes you want dumplings and noodles and, right. Peking duck. And just like there's all kinds of this like very, typical Asian street food at all these stalls, but there are no people around anywhere. And her mom and dad are both like, oh, well, let's sit down and eat. And when, the vendor comes, we'll pay them. And something's weird. And there's like this sixth sense Chihiro has because she's a little kid still and not a grown up. And so she senses something weird's going on. And then her parents are eating, but then they like don't stop eating, and they start to lose control of themselves. And they're just like shoveling food down their gullets. And then she's getting really scared because she can see that they're acting really abnormally. And then like all of a sudden they start morphing and transforming into these like large pigs, and they're still eating. And then like they become pigs and they run away. And then Chihiro like running away because she's so scared, and she ends up finding her way or bumping into this what appears to be like maybe a teenage boy who's like, here, take my hand, I'll protect you, they're coming. And then she gets whisked away by this guy into sort of this other dimension. And at this point, like the story starts and the adventure really gets underway. And it's so confusing and intricate and beautiful that I don't want to go into too much detail because it's just too confusing if you're not watching it. Yeah. But there's all of these characters. There's this this woman who so Chihiro ends up going to like this traditional Japanese like bathhouse to work, and it's like a sauna, like a spa. It's a spa. And all of these different like Shinto gods and spirits that are like from Japanese folklore, like go to this bathhouse. And the owner of the bathhouse is this witch named Yubaba, and she's kind of kidnapped Chihiro. But then you kind of find out later on in the story that maybe the bad guys aren't really the bad guys, and maybe the good guys are not the good guys. And it's a whole adventure, and it's really intricate and beautiful. And I think for most people who aren't really familiar, I'd say most people are not familiar enough with Japanese folklore and Shintoism, and I'm putting myself in this category, to really understand everything and all of the references in this movie. You could certainly educate yourself and get like every single reference. But even to this day, there are some things that I like don't quite understand, and I kind of chalk it up in my brain to be like, must be a Japanese thing I don't get. But I kind of prefer it that way because it adds to the magical, like the magic and whimsy of the story. And so it's kind of all about like the adventure that this young girl Chihiro goes on in this sort of other dimension where ghosts and spirits and gods kind of reside. Yeah.
So my bottom line with this movie is I'm actually kind of sad I waited as long as I did to see it, because it's really good. It's one of the, my opinion is it's one of the best things you've brought to the table to share with me. It's definitely better than Harry Potter.
Okay. You'll get it. And it came out before Harry Potter? I can't remember. Actually, I think it was maybe the same time. I'm sure it was in production long before the Harry Potter movies were. So it came out in Japan in 2001. I believe it came out in the United States in 2002. I heard about it from a friend. Like I just heard like, oh, this is really good. You probably like it. And I was like, okay, whatever, filed it away. And then I was in college, like after it was the Christmas vacation of my sophomore year of college. My mom had just moved. And so every Christmas before that, I would go back to hang out with my family. It was my mom and my grandma. My grandma had just moved in with my aunt. And so my mom took that opportunity to move closer to work. So I was spending Christmas with her, but my mom was an ICU nurse and she worked nights. So almost for that whole Christmas vacation, she was like working nights, including Christmas Day. So I was kind of like entertaining myself a lot. And Blockbuster Video was still a thing. And I rented a bunch of movies and I saw that Spirited Away was there. I was like, oh, this is that like cartoon movie my friend was telling me about. And it was like the perfect time of year to watch it because there's like kind of winter and there's like that Christmas magic kind of in the air and like the holiday season. And so I just remember like kind of getting all cozy with some hot chocolate and snacks and like sitting down to watch this movie like one night near Christmas. Well, my mom was at work, all my friends from college were at home visiting their families. And it was just like, I don't know, maybe the time of the year kind of added to the magic of the movie too. So yeah, I really liked it. And I've always liked it. And it's a movie that I always really want to be in the mood for when I watch it because I want to pay attention to it because it kind of deserves your attention and commands it. So it's not a movie that I'm ever like throw on in the background while I'm doing housework. It's always a movie where it's like almost like a special event. Like I'm going to sit down and watch this movie. Yeah. So
I think for me, some of the real big points that kind of won me over with the film was one, like I said, it's not childish in a way that makes it seem petulant. The character design is just bizarre and wild and very unique, unlike anything else you've ever seen. Well, maybe for big fans of anime, maybe it's something similar out there, but for me, as someone who's not, they seemed very unique, very unique characterizations. The character with was his name No Face?
Yeah, No Face.
Yeah, that character was really, really interesting and just crazy and bizarre, and just like it really fit into like what I enjoy about odd characters, and it was just a really well told tale and an adventure, and I can't say anything bad about it. I think if you haven't seen it and you're watching this podcast, you should go turn us off and go find it and watch it because it's a great movie. Yeah.
And I think it's a movie that like people of all ages could appreciate. Yeah. So if you watch it with your kids or show
something
it.
I'd like to share with my parents and see what they,
Yeah, I would. I think your dad would like it. I think it would frustrate your mother.
I think she'd ask a lot of questions.
She'd ask a lot of questions. Here's the truth. Your mom would probably like it. It would probably frustrate me. To watch it with her.
Yeah. She's not an easy person to watch anything with. So.
No, she's a lot of commentary. But that's okay. Mind's working. The mouth lets you know the mind's working.
Yeah.
So
what's next for us?
I don't know. What do you want to be next for us?
I don't know. I can't say at this point because we haven't determined what the next thing will be.
So one thing that's kind of newish on Netflix right now is the show Dracula, which I believe is a BBC show that was released during Halloween time in the UK and then got put on Netflix around Christmas time here. And we watched, it's kind of like the show Sherlock in that each episode is about like an hour or so long. So each episode's like a mini movie. And we watched the first episode one night and Nate was kind of like not impressed. And he's like, okay, I think I'm all set on that. But I like went back a week or two later and I stuck with it and watched the other two episodes. It's like a 3-part little mini series. And I really liked it a lot. Like I can agree with you that the first episode was kind of meh, but the second one and the third one are like really good. So I would like you to finish that and I would like to rewatch it with you.
Okay.
And then maybe, since that's kind of a horror movie, there's something I recently, not too long ago, saw for the first time with you, which were the first two Hellraiser movies.
Did you watch both of them?
I think I watched the first one and the second one because the second
one.
Those
are the only ones worth watching.
So the second one is the one where they go to like the hell dimension. Yeah. And there's like the guy.
Right.
And he's got the thing.
The doctor. Yeah, you got it.
So
the third sucks. It's great in a cult sense, but it's not a good movie.
Yeah.
So, and then there's like 12 more.
Okay. So what do you think about that? If we talk about the new Dracula show and Hellraiser?
It's an idea. It's definitely an idea.
I feel like he's going to veto me off camera and not wanting to finish Dracula.
No, I mean, I'm not going to say yay or nay at this point.
Well, what other ideas do you have?
I don't have any.
Okay.
Don't put me on the spot.
Okay.
I can't. I don't.
You put me on the spot.
I don't work well under pressure because I thought you had an idea.
I did, and you're like, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
You know what we'll see means? It's like I don't want to tell you no right now, but I'm going to tell you no later.
I can't commit to anything until I've had time to think about it. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to do something with video games though.
Okay, what do you have in mind with video games?
Somebody is calling me right now, and I don't know who you are, but stop it.
Oh, it's probably your mom. I'm positive it's your mother.
So, anyways, we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
and we'll get back to all of you with our next episode.
Okay.
And surprises are good. You don't have to plan.
Did we do an episode on Skyrim? Long time ago?
I don't know if we did.
I feel like it was like episode 2.
You may have mentioned it, but I don't know. I can't remember.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll consult.
We'll figure it out.
We'll consult each other.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we'll come back with a entertaining and insightful episode where we review a thing.
Or if you guys have an idea of something you want us to like share with each other, if something you want to share with us and we can talk about it, that's also okay too. The coffee suggestion was a lovely suggestion, and next time we roam far from home, we will definitely do that. So.
No, it was definitely an Indiana number.
Oh, was it like spam?
I don't know, but it ain't nobody I know.
All right.
So, anyways, great. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening.
Woohoo!
And whatever it is, we'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll be putting these up every other Saturday. We're changing our recording schedule to make it a little bit easier for us to record and edit and put them up. So we should, all things being equal, have these up every other Saturday.
And all things not being equal, we'll never make any again. No.
Well, if that happens, it's because one of us has leveled up.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, folks. This is Rachel from UtilityMuffinLabs.com. If you enjoyed the Playing Hooky podcast, think about supporting us. For more podcasts, art, videos, and gaming, go to UtilityMuffinLabs.com. Follow our podcast on Twitter, @HookyPodcast, on Instagram and Facebook at our Utility Muffin Labs name, and support us on YouTube at Utility Muffin Labs. Check out our other gaming-related podcasts, 25 Years of Vampire the Masquerade and the Nerdwords podcast. Thank you all for your support. Utility Muffin Labs, consistently rated adequate.